the enforcement side, but I think since the governor has also apparently done that, it doesn't really matter, so.
Who issued it from Wells?
The health,
Dr. Wallace?
yeah, Dr. Wallace, yeah, the health officer, or
That was interesting, that wasn't signed. I don't think by any of their county commissioners, it was Dr. Wallace who did all
yeah,
the speaking
right.
on their behalf.
Still trying to check in. I can't get Ken. Ken, can you hear us?
Okay, we're still waiting on Paul.
Yeah,
Paul.
let me see if he's coming.
I checked.
Hey, this is Barry.
Call in on the phone.
Yeah, that's what I did. I said, don't use audio on the computer. I dialed in on my phone.
Ken needs a call-in number.
Who needs the call-in number? Ken?
Okay, I will email it to him. Hold on.
Okay.
Is it the same number for all people?
Yeah, and there's multiple numbers there.
Should be in Ken's email now. His Windsor email. Ian is the same. Ian, can you hear us? He's gonna want to speak, right?
I don't know if he's gonna wanna speak for this. When we get to the point of needing Ian, he's gonna just come downstairs.
Oh, perfect. Then I'll quit bothering the man.
Ah, there he is. Are we
Wait for
waiting
Ken.
to get a few? Okay.
Heck, we have quorum.
Hornberger and Miles. Barry, you're still there, correct?
I'm here.
Miles, you too?
Yes, Miles is here.
Thank you.
They're working it.
I have two different numbers on here that I don't have identification for. Who's 686-6555?
That's probably Eric.
No, he's here.
That is Barry because I dialed in on my phone and then I'm connected to the video on my computer.
Thank you. Ken, are you on now?
Ian is, yes.
Thank you, Ian. I'm waiting for Ken.
Okay, well, how about you just email him, Mayor, do you wanna get us?
I can get started because, so we're gonna get started this evening for the town board work session for March 16, 2020. Couple of different things. We do have an agenda to talk about the land use code update, but we also want to talk about some of the COVID stuff that's going on and what Windsor's response and all of that's gonna be. And we have to look at some emergency proclamations and some other language that might be coming before us in the very near future. So we'll start out with one thing, but before that, I do want to send a message to everybody this evening. Good evening, Windsor residents. I'm Mayor Christy Melendez, and I share and hear your concerns about COVID-19. But I'm here to reassure you that the town and town staff are proactively working to ensure that town business goes on as usual without disruptions in your services. And our police are working 24/7 to ensure your safety. Your health and welfare is our greatest concern, and there is no need to panic but remain vigilant, and please heed all warnings and recommendations pushed out by state and county officials to reduce impact and spread. We are Windsor strong, and together we will get through this. For updates, you can go to windsor.org/coronavirus. So thank you, and just want everybody to know that there is a place to go to get updated information. Absolutely.
And it just feels like we should have a coordinated effort, and it may be happening, and I appreciate, Shane, you guys have done an excellent job kind of pulling the team together here. I'm sure there's been a lot of conversation that, to which we haven't been party.
Well, that's why I even alerted him, is our mind and presence even gonna be able to focus on this, on the planning updates tonight, with all this other stuff,
Right.
you know, in front of us or it's too, so I guess that is a decision.
I thought this was gonna be scheduled first work session in April, or is that more? in
No,
addition-
there's.
Is that addition to this?
It is, so this
Okay.
one was already, the board had taken a look at this, we had the discussion, and the board had some questions, so that's coming back, and then we had that other effort that's coming back in April, so.
Okay.
So what are the thoughts or the wishes to move forward?
Well, the land use code update tonight, we're pretty much just recovering or re-explaining where we're at.
Well, there were,
What's
there were
changed?
some concerns I think some of us had with some of these items, and that's what's,
Okay,
we're revisiting, I
Okay.
think, some of those recommendations with regards to, there were some questions specifically, I think, with trails, some questions with pocket parks, some questions with who and what would be involved in the process.
Right, and I've got a fair number of comments or notes, but in fact, just like last time, I've got about halfway through all of the ordinances. It's a long read, and,
well, and Ian's coming down, Ian's here now, I wanted to,
so I guess I would, it's not a motion, but I guess I'd like to kind of focus on the virus and the steps the town is taking. I appreciate you guys have been trying to push this over the
Yep.
goal line for so long, and the amount of work that I guess that you've had to do individually without the consultant
Right.
is Herculean.
But at the same
Absolutely.
time, what we're discussing there is important, long, and changing things to code. So I think it ought to be given, you know, have the time and the focus that is warranted. And if our focus isn't there, then maybe we should, you know, dismiss this for another time and talk about the other issue at hand. Paul, what do you wanna do?
are we technologically connected?
Yes.
We do, we have, I know for
We
sure,
are.
I know, I've heard,
Right where we
I've
can
heard
be.
Barry and I've heard Miles. I don't
That's
know
not Ken's
about
picture
Ken.
on this.
You know, the coronavirus discussion gonna take, I mean,
It could
if we
go,
have time for both,
could go long, I don't know.
Right.
So,
yeah, so I'm okay postponing if it's gonna be a long discussion. I don't know if, what staff's thoughts are. You know, if it's gonna be a reasonable time, I mean, I'm okay staying a little longer and doing both too. I guess it's just whatever the group wants to do.
I think my concern is, you know, sort of almost beyond what we're doing to protect our employees, and then obviously the community and the residents, and I think a lot of stuff has already happened. It feels like it's happening a little bit piecemeal, where school district organizations are making their own decisions to close or not close. But then what really scares me more than anything is the business community, especially the small business owners in Windsor. They're not going to be able to handle a significant disruption in service. Cash flow probably is not that.
EA information, economic development has it, they've talked to Rich Warner, at Upslope, so they really talked about how to get that information out to folks. But I think the really small employers are gonna really struggle with that. I think the really large employers that say, geez, you know, our first quarter profits were down because of this, those places are gonna take advantage of money. These small restaurants and stuff, I just think that they're, you know,
Is that what you're referring to, is this, the governor's mandate about an hour ago?
well, no, cause Will County.
Well, county issued some.
The governor just issued an hour ago that
Mhm.
all restaurants, casinos, theaters are to close
Yeah.
across the state for the next 30 days.
And
And I don't know how restaurants survive that
Right.
So I
for
think,
30 days.
well, so I think the first
Employees
decision
and
is,
their
do we wanna proceed and with these folks, give us a presentation, talk about planning,
Because I think this is more of a finite, we could take care of this, because the coronavirus thing might take longer.
well, I know, I think we've got several, there was 80-some pages to this, I think
Sorry,
there's
I don't know
a,
what all we need.
I think this is a couple of, and Dave's got some questions, I still have some questions, surrounding some of the packet, and other folks may too, I don't know. I think Doc Jones and some of the folks on the phone, so, and that's fine, that's why we're here, but we
Sure.
just need to know, so they can get either going, maybe, so let's get going, I guess, with this. We'll see how far we can kind of get through and where we're at, and then we'll leave the other discussion at the end.
Okay.
Is that okay? So, Mr. Hornbeck, it looks like you're up and maybe ready to go, so, oh, there, I see the other folks now.
Are you still having? is
The
it-
internet is going in and out, and Cameron is here to work on that, so that's why we were bumped off. As long as we have phone, we're good, having conversation, the presentation just wouldn't be up.
We pay our bill?
Yes, sir. We're seeing disruption with servers in many places right now.
A lot of activity.
All right, well,
Okay,
thanks, everyone. So just to step back for a moment before we get into more of the details, just a kind of snapshot of where we are in this process. We started with the code update in 2016, and at that point, we had the consultant on board, and they did the stakeholder interviews and provided a summary of major themes that they heard from some of those stakeholders. That's included in your packet materials for reference. And then we began drafting different sections of the code. Landscape code was one of the easier ones we did almost 2 years ago now that we got that done. But the other sections we've been continuing to draft and bringing them to work sessions and getting stakeholder input. And then based on that input, coming back to another work session, and then finally in ordinance format for adoption. So tonight, we're focusing on the procedures and administration and subdivisions. So getting into the subdivision standards. So I'm gonna run through what we've already discussed as kind of a reminder and make sure we're all still on board with that, and then touch on any stakeholder input or any things that we've tried to address based on your comments from our last work session. So in subdivisions, we talked about connectivity and how we're going for a more well-connected street network, like the example on the right, and that's based on a lot of feedback from comprehensive plan, now the transportation master plan that's will be before you in the very near future for adoption, other documents where it really sets a policy of trying to create connectivity for shorter trips, both by car and walking and biking. There was some stakeholder comment on,
You got one response. So when you say stakeholder feedback, it's really just that one company. who
Correct,
provides
yeah.
comment.
and that was a landscaping design.
Norris
company.
Design.
Norris Design, yeah.
The land planning consultant that works with Water Valley Land Company.
Yeah, they did the rain dance PUD.
Right.
Others just didn't how many did you send it out? Do you have an idea?
we sent it to all the companies that frequently work in Windsor. I'd say maybe half a dozen. Portion. Open space is the next topic we had discussed a couple months back. And again, we're not really proposing any changes since then. Just as a reminder, what we talked about, again, the comprehensive plan encourages open space, conservation, and we've heard through other efforts and other projects that there is a desire for more open space in town. So the code updates proposes requiring the 20 to 30% open space with residential subdivisions, and it can be provided in a variety of different types of open space. Some of these methods shown on the screen. And a component of that is with the more compact development that we're proposing to allow in the new RMU2 zone district, with the smaller lot sizes, wanting to ensure that people do have access to a place to throw the frisbee or walk the dog when you don't really have much of a yard. So that's part of the intent behind that.
Well, when determine those percentages or what they're gonna have to provide in open space. You mentioned in there unusable open space, like if you had a steep hillside that took up quite a bit of room, but nobody could navigate it or, wanna walk down in there or anything like that. Do we count that as part of their percentage?
I'd have to look back at the code language, but,
There are specific provisions that talk about what is and isn't considered open space.
Right, but do they give them credit for that anyway?
the intent behind the open space isn't necessarily that it's 100% usable. I think it's both an aesthetic and a kind of small town feel. Some of it certainly would be usable. When we get into the pocket park, it's just a small component of that we certainly want to be usable and not,
Sure.
yeah.
But I think it does count toward open space.
The pocket
Pocket park,
Yes,
yeah.
correct.
Yeah, Pocket Park does.
Does Eric have any thoughts about any of this that he wanted to chime in on or anything? No?
But this, we're not looking at, any future neighborhood parks. These are all in
Correct, there'd be,
in replacement of those
I think,
as we're moving, right? That's,
yeah, and Eric can talk more knowledgeably about this, but, so I've got the map up that shows when they recently amended the park fees, looking at where the neighborhood parks are existing and planned, so there's a few more that are planned, but beyond that.
beyond that, yeah, right.
Right.
Eric, did you have anything you wanted to add to the conversation about the parks?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Okay. So I would concur with exactly what Paul said. The pocket parks would be a supplement to our existing park system. The only thing that I would point out is the neighborhood park on the left-hand side of the screen, if I'm looking at it, over Long County Road 5, which is Fossil Creek. That landowner has chosen not to build that park and to just pay us the fee in lieu. So we would probably use that money to seek a parcel somewhere else in the future for a neighborhood park. But the pocket park concept really does supplement those areas that would pop up in the future to supplement our built-out park system. But it would be on the developer to maintain the park, not the town, so we're not taking on additional maintenance responsibilities.
Why would, so that's not one of the parks, is it, that's in the queue now?
Yes, it is. Yes, it's one of the parks that have been left in the queue.
It is, isn't there like 4 of them?
It is.
Okay, so that is
Yeah,
one.
so you've got Harmony,
That is one of them.
correct,
Okay.
Harmony Ridge, yes. Harmony Ridge to the north, the Fossil Creek one that I mentioned on the screen, Windshire's built, Village East is built, Wayne Miller is a future one, as is Jacoby Farm, and then Takankala and Labu, which is the southernmost red dot.
Eric, just to clarify though, the red dot, which is furthest west, you're saying that the developer said, no thanks? Those are ordinance?
Well, that's Horton. It wasn't a no thanks. They wanted us to put a park in a location that we did not want the park, and so therefore he chose to just pay the fee in lieu. I don't know that number off the top of our head, but the way the fee in lieu pot kind of works is those dollars sit there, and we have, and Ian can correct me if I'm wrong, somewhere around the range of about 10 years to spend those dollars, which means go buy more parkland, or we would have to give that money back.
This isn't the neighborhood park then, or it is? I mean, I'm
It
sorry.
is a neighborhood park.
Not a pocket
It
park.
is.
correct.
And do
Not a
you,
pocket park.
and are you required because it was deemed to be a neighborhood park? Is that the only thing we can do with those monies, or can we actually take it and turn it to open space?
Here's the,
I believe it can be used for open space, purchase, trails, or park land.
Okay, So we
I
could,
need to triple check the code, but I believe that's the case.
so you could convert that, I mean, even if it wasn't a queue, but if if the developer now has, you know, given us cash in lieu, and if you look at the, whole, you know, your whole, game plan, you know, your comp plan, and you say, gee, we've got enough neighborhood parks anyway, but where we're lacking or what we need is maybe open space or something else, could you divert and do something different with those dollars?
Yes, I believe, I need to triple check, but I believe that that is the case. I'm fairly certain that you're correct, I could do that.
Okay, and we have Ian here and he's shaking his head.
So yeah, if you use it
Okay.
as to support new capital investment in neighborhood parks as defined under the old ordinance, then you're still using it for the purpose for which you collected it. If you use it to build
Correct.
community parks, that would be a no-no. But if it is used to support the establishment of new neighborhood parks or to facilitate neighborhood parks, I'm gonna say you can use it for that.
Okay.
And it's-
Or whatever we define in that now, because we might not define it
Yeah,
just
and-
as neighborhood parks anymore, right? We define it as open space,
Under-
pocket parks, some of these,
Under the new ordinance and under the fees you collect under the new ordinance, yeah, you can use it for that.
natural habitat, or, okay.
But
Right.
that which you collected under
But
the old.
even under the old ordinance, I believe it said that fee in lieu dollars went for parkland, open space, or trails.
Okay. I mean, I just want to make sure that above all else, we maintain some flexibility, right? Because what was slated
Absolutely.
for whatever time period, I think this might give us, or, you know, or you, you know, or the town, a new opportunity to do something better than quote unquote, just another neighborhood park.
Absolutely, I think you're spot on.
Okay.
Paul, does the pocket park regime of ordinances also allow for a developer to say, nah, never mind, here's cash in lieu?
No, because they're developer-provided parks, so the town wouldn't go out and build the park for them.
Can they decide not to build the park if we have it, if we want to see a neighborhood, a pocket park? Do they have an option to say, yeah, well, but I don't want
If there's a certain number of units within,
that,
the requirement can be waived if they're already close enough to a park.
right?
If the town wanted to go in and build a neighborhood park there, then they would meet that requirement. So that'd be fine.
I'm just thinking, you know, and you're talking about this neighborhood park, obviously there is a comprehensive plan as to where we think we see parks and trails and connectivity. And if we allow people to opt out of that, now the whole plan breaks down, because you had a trail going to this park and then, but the park never got built because we took cash instead. So, I don't want that to happen, because I think we all value this idea of having a really nice connected series of parks and trails.
I think the idea of the pocket parks is great, but I've expressed this before about, you know, the ongoing maintenance. And I guess you have some buffers in here. If it's a metro district, I think I'd feel pretty comfortable. If it was an HOA, I'm not sure I would. And Ian mentioned in here a lien on all the property owners in that subdivision. So what do you do if the HOA says, yeah, we'll handle it, and they don't handle it? Does every title to any one of all those houses have a little, you know, clause in there that, oh, by the way, if the park isn't taken care of by the HOA, you're gonna be.
As far as somebody walking up to them and saying, do you know that the only way you could guarantee that would be to have some sort of requirement on the HOA to say, by the way, if we fall apart, the town of Windsor can step in and do to you what we have the power to do. So that was my reasoning.
I think the caution there, you know, because you're right, I think you can step in or be subordinated to the HOA's authority so long as they have that authority. So your declaration is gonna have to say as a member of the homeowner association, you have to pay dues,
Yeah.
annual dues, those dues are to be applied to blah, 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 including pocket park maintenance.
Right.
And if they fail to pay that, then you can put a lien on the property and collect it through an assessment or otherwise.
So, yeah.
If that authority doesn't exist in the declaration, then you won't be able to piggyback on it as a town.
I suppose you could set it up that way, but what I'm saying is if you build it into the code, just like we have the power to abate nuisances and lien property through a process, we could give ourselves that power through the Windsor Municipal, even if it isn't called for under the declaration.
Okay,
But I see what you're saying. In a perfect world, they line up.
yeah.
Mayor?
Yes.
Miles has a question. He's
Okay.
raising his hand. Miles, are you there?
Yeah, I had a question for Eric regarding that park on the left side that we took the cash in lieu. I would think it'd be important to use that money to make sure those people are connected via trail to the next closest park. So, because that whole community won't have a park over there. Seems like a trail to the nearest park would be the best use of the money.
I think you're correct. We don't have anything in our policy that says where those dollars must be spent, but I think you're spot on. Philosophically, we should try our best to spend the dollars in the area where it's being collected from. So the connectivity of that Fossil Creek subdivision over there off of 5.
And if we're taking on like the HOA,
Well, Mayor, I think it'd be more along the lines of if the HOA fails, most of the things they do aren't town provided, but I think the residents are gonna look at the park and say, hey, town, you know, we've got this park that's gone to pot and you need to come in and help us out because we're taxpayers and we have these expectations. So I think most of the HOA things where they come up short, we could say, you know, we're not gonna do that. But I think there'd just be that political pressure coming back for the town to do that, so I think that's why Dr. Jones is saying, is there some way to temper that or buffer that, where we give that political pressure, say, hey, look, you guys have the tools all along.
I guess, Dr. Jones, it certainly is still a convoluted process to reimburse ourselves, but that I think is your concern. Probably gets there at the end of the day, but it'll take a while.
Yeah, it would not be popular with residents, I'm sure, either way, but, I mean, if there's no other solution, that's what we do, and hopefully, you know, if it is a metro district, I think we have a lot of leverage there to make sure it's taken care of.
I was curious, Paul, if we have these pocket parks or anything that is throughout this new code maintained by the Metro District or the HOA, so technically they're kind of private property. I saw language in here that says, but they need to be remain open to the public. Do town ordinances, like with respect to alcohol consumption or vaping or smoking, apply to those even though they're technically private property maintained by private individuals?
Look to Ian on that one.
If it's a privately owned amenity,
Right.
it's not subject to, it's not a town-owned amenity,
Right.
so. So, your smoking example, the smoking ban would not apply to those privately owned
Right.
facilities.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
Even if we stepped in under what we're talking about and maintained it, because we don't own it.
Right.
Well, but let me give another example here. If the town board did an ordinance that says there's no smoking within 100 feet of any playground, I think that, you know, because the town board really focus in on town parks and stuff, I think that's why it doesn't extend to a private.
Yeah, I don't think.
But same thing, if we said, with like liquor, if we just said no open containers in town, that would apply privately and publicly. But because we've narrowed that ordinance to public parks, it doesn't extend to private.
I can't have an open container in my
Your
backyard?
backyard, that's
Well,
right.
I'm sorry, but,
Oops.
I'm sorry, I should have explained to an attorney. But you know, like how we have, like, generally, in a lot of communities, open containers and stuff in parks just aren't allowed anywhere, whether it's public or private, because we've focused on how, like, kind of time, place, and manner for that use. We regulate our own parks, but not on privately owned.
Yeah, Water Valley, of course, has a number of parks that are Water Valley parks.
Metro District.
Yeah, so it really ends up being a district HOA rule that says you can't have alcohol or you can't do this. So it probably does fall to then the local community to set their own rules.
The owner.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, whoever. Okay, just wanted, I thought that's probably how it came out, but, thank you.
So,
Flying along so far, Paul.
absolutely. So other items on the pocket park. So there was stakeholder input, again, from Norris Design on, they're asking the walking radius of where they should be located. Initially, they should be within a quarter mile of all residents. I think they had a good point that a third of a mile would also be in a slightly less onerous requirement, and it's still within walking distance of folks. Generally, a half-mile walk is about 10 minutes. That's kind of the rule of thumb of where you want to have things that you're hoping people can walk to, is about a half mile. So the third mile radius takes into account that there's not always a straight line. They'd also raised the question of required elements within the pocket park, and the town board had discussed this as well, in terms of wanting to have flexibility, not necessarily dictating all the elements. So we have tweaked the language to make sure that there is some flexibility in that. Other background, and I guess any questions on any of this?
If I remember right, I think the ordinance has this table in it, but I think there's also like the ordinance below it that says minimum 20,000 square feet.
Correct, so
Is that right?
the minimum size is 20,000, and this is the ratio for how much.
So if you had a development with only 200 units, you'd still have to have a 20,000 square foot park,
Correct, yeah,
despite the table.
right. So we might,
Hey, Paul, this is Barry. I have a quick question. Does almost every subdivision have open space or land or some kind of amenity that they maintain, even if it's just watering and mowing?
yeah, I'd say that's a fair characterization.
Yeah, so just my only point would be that, some of these ideas might add a little bit to it, but it shouldn't be a foreign concept to any HOA that's out there.
Well, any current HOA. 'Cause
Right.
There are some older areas in town that don't follow any of this.
Yeah, that don't have any HOAs at all, yeah.
Yeah.
So we'd also talked about the size of pocket parks, and so I pulled up Bison Ridge as an example, just to show you, kind of walk through what an acre, what 2 acres is. The Bison Ridge Park, coincidentally, is almost exactly 2 acres in size. If you exclude, or if you just look at the kind of irrigated, improved areas, it's approximately an acre. And then if you narrow that down even further to really just kind of the playground, the picnic structure, all those amenities, that's about a half acre, just to illustrate what the half acre is, which is about 20,000 square feet.
Oh, I was gonna say, hey Siri, how many square feet in a half acre?
No.
She's working on it.
You get about 10 devices answering. Hey, Paul, one thing I want to point out that's good about this park too, there's no streets between Ridge West and Bison Ridge that you can drive on.
Right.
So this park, you see the trail, it connects Ridge West neighborhood to Bison Ridge neighborhood, for, walkers, bikers, and so on. So I think that connection is utilized a lot.
Yeah, that's a good point, and absolutely what we're trying to achieve with the neighborhood trails concept. So I think that's all I've got on the pocket parks, if we're ready to move on to the trails.
Okay.
So this is another just Windsor example of a neighborhood that's Harmony Ridge, that's been, the first filing is the north portion. It was built without any trails, because there's really no code requirement that they provide trails. The second filing, staff worked with the developer to try and push for them to put some trails in. Just, I think, seeing the first filing built the way it was and trying to learn from that, and still having to push for the trails. And the developer was willing.
You've had trail requirements in the code forever, I thought, in the last 20 years or so? No?
We haven't, I don't,
Now, we've had the Trails Master Plan that shows essentially the connections regionally around town, but there really hasn't been anything, it's been more of a staff negotiated thing with each subdivision, and that's why we're trying to have it a little more consistency. We've been lucky to have developers that want to provide a nice trail system, and those have been easy. It's the ones that maybe don't want to provide those amenities that it's been a struggle for staff, so.
in the Trails Master Plan that Scott referenced, so that would be the Harmony Road Trail. That's an example of one of those that's on our map and it's being put in with this development. But all the other trails were really more of a negotiation.
But now there'll be requirement, is that what we're saying? Okay.
I think we all probably like that idea, because I think that connected communities are fantastic. It's probably the technical language in the ordinance, Paul. I was looking at it, and it discusses the neighborhood trails in the context of connecting to school sites, pocket parks, town trails. But it doesn't talk about neighborhood trails connecting to neighborhood trails. And I was trying to make this point when we were discussing this some other time. You know, and all this is planned out within one development, so you can kind of say, okay, that trail was from here to here. But if you had, and I know this isn't Windsor, but if you
Property line, and then the next property will need to connect to that. We can.
I think it ought to
do
be
that,
to the extent feasible.
Sure.
But I'd hate to have the next developer say, well, no, I want to put, you know, my nice houses there, and that trail's gonna go right up to somebody's backyard.
Mhm.
It's stopped. So if we have the language in there, we can.
We can do that, yeah.
Who's required to do all the operations and maintenance on all these trails we're making them?
It's the same people we're gonna put a lien on if they don't.
Right.
It's
It's
the HOA,
Yeah.
it's not, because, well, that's all, I mean, a nice idea. I mean, I think the question that we asked last time was about the sidewalks, which I know that this says that you can't count sidewalks, but as part of your trail connectivity, because you want trails in places and spaces like, you know, in green belts, but that's not always necessarily gonna be that ideal to make that connectivity happen either. I mean, sometimes it is gonna be some portion of a sidewalk to make that connectivity happen. You're not gonna be able to always have
Yep.
the trail connections.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like in this example, this trail essentially ends here and you'd hop on the sidewalk for the last bit.
Right, so, but because I thought I read somewhere, and my phone is dying now, so I can't read that. But it says that sidewalks can't count though as trail connectivity, but sometimes they will be used as at least a partial connector in some places, and I think we have to allow for that too, because it has to be within, you know, some reasonableness too about how we're making these connections. We can't assume that we're always gonna find all the space and place or the willing landowners to allow us to make those connections.
And I think you'd stressed before that you've now built in a fair amount of flexibility. I think you're absolutely right, Mayor. In certain situations, imagine that this is a different development here, and we have this trail coming down, and you're saying, well, I'd love it to kind of come over through here, and this can't happen for whatever reason. They may have to take the sidewalk down along
Right.
here before they can cross over. And I
A
think
sidewalk
that's-
is better than nothing. I mean, a sidewalk is still, I think. So I couldn't tell by what I was reading though if the language allowed enough flexibility to allow for that. Because it sounded to me like they could not count sidewalks as that. And I just want to make sure that we do have that allowance when we need to utilize that.
Yeah, I think as written,
It
probably
does allow,
not, or
okay.
probably does not, so we can tweak it to
Okay.
do that.
Because I think, and I don't know if Miles is still here or can hear us, but I think, if I remember right, he even asked a question about the sidewalk connectivity in the last time we looked at this as well. So I want to make sure that that's in there somewhere and can be allowed when necessary.
Ken has a question. Ken, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Just barely.
Hello?
Just barely.
Really? Okay. The connectivity is really a critical part. We've all talked about that. Whether it be a trail or a sidewalk, I'm looking at it in terms of the objective. And I'm thinking the objective would be to get from maybe neighborhood A to neighborhood B to a location downtown or to Main Park or to High Hops or someplace else. So it doesn't matter if it's a trail or a sidewalk, as long as we could map out how a person could physically move from one neighborhood through another to a destination downtown or someplace else in town.
That's the goal, I think.
Yeah.
Right?
And you already have that somewhat defined by the neighborhood you live in and the area that you're part of, so.
Anything else on the trails? We'll make those updates as we discussed. So just running through the stuff we've covered previously, that's, just make sure we're all on the same page. The double frontage lots where you've got a house that has a front street and then kind of backs up to oftentimes an arterial or collector type street. Code is just trying to make sure that those look more like the image on the right with a landscape tract rather than just a row of fence and gravel. So that's incorporated.
It's a good place for a campaign sign, though.
Except again, I hope that we're really recognizing more xeriscaping because
Sure.
on the right, well, we all love how that looks. That's a lot of water and maintenance and maybe unnecessarily as much as we like that look and feel, but I think if water conservation
100% because 25 doesn't really allow the town to go in and complete those improvements should it be necessary.
A couple of questions on Paul. I kept in my head as I read this trying to picture a significantly encumbered lot versus a normally encumbered lot. And from your language, I can tell there is a difference. At least the developer said, well, standard encumbrances should be okay. Okay, so I don't know. What is the standard? Is that just a electric line or a gas line easement or something versus the what? What is the significant?
So a standard lot, residential, would be platted with a 8 to 10 foot easement in the front for utilities. I think similar in the rear, and those would be standard. Oftentimes a 5-foot drainage easements on the side. What we're, the significantly encumbered term is when half of your backyard is a ditch or a road. We didn't want to assign a percentage or a number just to allow flexibility for, because it is kind of hard to define that. When does it reach that threshold?
So it's not based on percentage or width, I guess, necessarily?
It's not.
Okay, so I guess it's part of when they're planning out the neighborhood and they draw that lot there and you say, well, whoops, that whole backyard is unusable, so.
Yeah, I think the example that Paul referred to that recently occurred is a ditch that runs along the backs of several lots, and essentially almost their entire backyard is a ditch, rider's road and ditch easement, but we had no way to say that you can't include that square footage in the lot. So there are gonna be a lot of people who we anticipate those people are not gonna be real thrilled to find out that a third to half of their lot is something that they really can't put a shed on or do anything with, because they've gotta allow access for the ditch to come in and do maintenance all the time. Ideally, we would have platted those lots outside of that ditch easement altogether, or that ditch area, so that way those people have their full property, but, so.
Okay. And on the improvement of security, depending on the particular development, that could be a significant amount of money. I mean, $6-8 million of streets and infrastructure. So the idea is the developer would give you the $6-8 million as security. They then go off and start doing the work, so they're going to have to incur the cost of that $6-8 million. I'm assuming it may be released in phases. You complete phase 1, we'll release that money.
Yeah, it can be done in phases, and it's usually not a check, it's a letter of credit or a
Right.
bond, where it does cost the money to provide that, but it's not the huge.
Oh, so they don't have to actually come up with it? When I was
Yeah.
reading through, that's what I was questioning, they're gonna have to give you like,
We could have had one heck of a Christmas
All the money.
holiday party.
And it's not only released in phases, it can be posted in phases as well.
Yeah,
So-
I don't know what the fee, I mean, the fee, some, depending on your credit,
Right,
but
right.
1%,
I don't know.
one,
Now they get the 90% when it's completed, and then we hold 10% for warranty.
Correct, yeah.
So after and our warranty's 1 year.
Yes.
and did you not get response to that, or was this proposed to the one, Norris didn't say anything about it? Of course not, they're designers, they're not. I would imagine that this would get a lot of pushback.
I thought the same, but we did not get any.
that's what I would think too, I was
Well, but they only
surprised.
got a response from Norris Design. As to this issue, am I right, you still only got the one response?
We got no comments on this particular issue, security.
I guess I'd wanna flag it and say,
Yeah.
maybe we better run it by, not that it isn't the right thing to do. What will happen is you'll only have companies with the financial wherewithal and probably driving toward metro districts because they have the taxing authority to be able to afford a significant bond. Because if you're not creditworthy, you won't get the bond, so, which may not be a bad thing.
If I remember correctly, and this would be going way, way back, but it seems we did at one time require 100%, way back in the 70s and 80s. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, I wasn't here in the seventies or eighties, but I
Yeah.
remember hearing that as maybe it was reduced from 100% to 25%, as kind of an incentive of sorts back when that change was made. And I think our experience over the last 20 years has been that it's a lot of administrative work to track a small amount of money that really wouldn't serve its intended purpose if we needed to use it. So I don't know if the answer is all or none, but 25%, if it's not going to serve the purpose, then it's gonna be more work to just track it. We may wanna consider one or the other extreme, I guess. But I think we looked at other jurisdictions too to see what the common practice was, and
And what was it? Was it more 100% versus,
It was.
or was it somewhere in between? It was 100%.
yeah, when I worked at Weld County, it was like 110% security, but the improvements probably varied, they're more of a rural standard, but
Like I said, it's just gonna make sure you'll have pretty financially strong developers doing this,
right.
which may not, less likely to ever have to call on the loan.
So before we move off that, the direction from you folks is to circle back and send that out and make sure people understand this requirement would change.
Well, I think in our last meeting, aren't we circling back on a couple of other things
Well,
too? This could be
we
another,
are. I just wanna make sure
in
this is-
addition to, I think,
Yeah.
yes.
I think it'd be advisable.
At least bring it to their attention.
So that concludes the subdivision section, so I don't know if there's any overall discussion on that or direction other than what we heard tonight, if you want this to come back for another work session or if it would be ready for adoption with those changes.
Yeah, Paul, I guess this goes, what's the counter, what's the oversight? I'm nervous because you don't have really the development committee feedback on this. If I knew that, in fact, they were sitting there looking at it with you at the same time, then I'd know that at least there's a consensus. And I can't represent that consensus, I can't represent that other side of it.
For what it's worth, I think, Paul referenced a half a dozen developers that we sent it out to. And I think that's about an accurate number. If you look at the active developers around town right now, John Turner has Highland Meadows Golf Course just about completely built out. and he's concentrating on wrapping up the development around the power to play in that more commercial multifamily area. So I don't know that he has a whole lot of concern about it. I don't want to speak for him, but I think that's probably why he didn't spend time commenting on it. Likewise, Jeff Mark, the Landis Company representative that's working on the Ridge at Harmony Road, another one of our more recent big developments. He's wrapping up the third filing and they don't have another project coming, so I don't know that he really had a lot of interest in working on the code going forward. And so the reason we concentrated on Norris and the Water Valley team was because they've got the most activity and the most filings coming forward. So it wasn't out of trying to not solicit the input, it was just that having worked with them on the Rain Dance PUD, using that as kind of a model to put these changes together, it just worked out that Norris was the one that we got the most feedback from, and Water Valley.
Sure. If you were to go to those developers, if you send it out to 12 and say, look, either give us your feedback or give us a statement that says, I don't care, or that, you know, we're fine with whatever you adopt, because they're not gonna say that they don't find it relevant anymore, but that's why.
Right.
But at least we know then that they looked at it.
Yeah.
And now I don't know if it's similar to the other, it just fell through the cracks, they saw it and said, oh, I gotta get to that, and forgot. Whereas if they've at least said something that, yeah, we've skimmed it and we're good, then at least we know, I think, when we look at that they had the opportunity and they acknowledge that they had the opportunity.
Sure.
So it may be a procedure.
Isn't no answer an answer, David?
I'm sorry, sir? Oh, well,
Yeah.
it is in some areas of law. Though I'm not sure.
Lease, you know, that comes along later, so you wouldn't have to retrofit. And did we ever decide whether we could require that, or is that not possible? When they put in the other utilities, and I think we even talked about maybe we'd compensate them for it and then collect it when they develop the lot, but,
The dig once ordinance
Yeah.
that was discussed, really it wasn't part of the land use code discussion, it was a separate conversation, and I think the concept is,
So there were quite a few, I mean, there's quite a few engineering things that engineering brought up, and also just logistically, just understanding where it would go. So kind of legal and engineering were batting this thing around quite a bit, and we were just, you know, I know other communities have dig once policies. I think doing the ordinance would be easy. I think actually having it work out the way the town wants it to work out is another challenge. And it's really the biggest one we've talked about.
So we approved that ordinance, but what you're saying is we haven't,
No.
we haven't approved that?
half the condos.
Oh, it was just a
Consent.
concept.
Yeah.
Oh, we haven't officially.
Yeah.
Because we found we have some issues. Is that,
Yeah, it's just really when we looked at actually applying it, you know, if we had at least a dashboard layout, if we knew everywhere where we wanted conduit, that's probably a big box to check. Some of these other engineering struggles, I think we could kind of work through it and understand it wouldn't be perfect, but right now it would just be without some kind of design, where are we gonna put it, you know? I mean, you could pull up maybe some subdivision in town and say, well, where does it go?
Okay, and I
Hey,
just.
Shane?
Yep,
Hey, the one thing I have, and I agree that, you know, we need to have some kind of plan, but there could be some exceptions like County Road 13 and the Thornton Pipeline, if it comes through there. You know, that might be an obvious choice to get kind of that one of those main roads to get that conduit in there for the future. And there may be other opportunities like that we could do on a one-off basis.
Okay, I guess my main question was, you know, there was follow-up, obviously, to when we discussed it.
there has been a lot
Sounds
internally.
Sounds like you did your homework on it, and,
yeah, I thought for some reason we had created that as kind of our standard, but no, we're
No,
still going through that.
and then one other question, it's on the next page, 26, non-potable water systems. And if the management entity fails to you know, be able to run it or take care of it. The town inherits it, sounds like. And is that all sewn up tight that we would go in and I guess if the Metro District or something, if something failed, and we would just take over that system and.
We do require them to build those to our standards, and I think part of the reason for that is just in case we do have to take them over. I haven't seen it happen, but it is built into the code.
Okay. All right, that's all I have on the subdivision.
On the actual ordinance, Paul, this is page, come on.
Weld County doesn't have a similar database, so we just use that database to make sure that we're not duplicating any street names. In particular, Loveland, Fort Collins, or neighboring communities, I think Severance also uses the database, even though they're in Weld County.
They use Larimer?
I believe so, yeah. And it's simply because there isn't a similar database in Weld County.
I know we've had the issue where Severance has the same street names as some in
Yeah,
Windsor.
with the same zip code, and that's a problem, and I don't know how that, but we have some duplicate street names. So would that, I mean, would that have been avoidable before this code, or even should we or they or whoever have checked that out before?
It should have been avoided, and the way the Larimer County IGA works, they've got the database, and once we get a subdivision application in and it's proposed street names, we go in and reserve those street names in the database so that no other communities can snatch them up before we use them. And then once the town board approves the subdivision, we go in and confirm those, and then they're permanently ours. But I guess if, maybe I misspoke, if Severance maybe has some, are they newer street
Can
names?
somebody check to make sure that
Yeah.
Severance is following that? Because
Yeah.
somebody did bring that up at my coffee with the mayor, that there's a couple of streets in
That's
Severance
the post office
that
user,
had
right?
duplicate
Yeah.
names and the zip code, and until Severance, at some time, maybe if Severance ever gets its own zip code, that would alleviate that, right? Because then people will be going Severance, Colorado, 80, whatever. But right now, it's the exact same street name and Windsor 80550.
Well, and to actually avoid this, though, the Postal Service has advised everybody in Severance to have it be Severance, Colorado 80550. So even though it's the same zip code, they want everybody up there that's got utilities, their address, they want them to spell out that it's Severance 80550 so that there isn't the street. I mean, it can still cause the Postal Service to get it mixed up, but yes, I have some clients up there that have been told for years that the Postal Service wanted them to put Severance 80550.
I'd verify that though, because we did a whole bunch of mailers out there, and I think all those mailers went to Windsor.
It comes through Windsor, what I'm saying is they want them to,
No, but I mean, the address bar to those addresses that we pulled from a
right.
national mailing
That's right.
database list said Windsor.
I'm saying that the people that live there, when they set up their utilities and do all of that for people that will regularly be sending them mail, they want them to put down that it's Severance 80550, which, you're right, when you call somebody up and you give them your zip code, it pulls up Windsor. What I'm saying is that they want people in Severance to mention that they are Severance 80550, not Windsor.
We'll follow up to see if there are recent duplications and find out what their process is over there to make sure.
Yep. Yep.
But Severance has their own zip code too, beside 80550.
Mhm.
It's 80546 or something like that.
Yeah. Which I think is for what, PO Box use? Or is it for,
Well, I know the town hall uses that, 80546, and it's Timberline, it's not a PO box, or Timber Ridge.
yeah, I've heard that they have their own zip code, I thought it was for PO Boxes or something like that.
I think even the house numbers were the same.
Mhm.
I mean, the address was absolutely
Yeah.
identical except for Severance versus Windsor.
Right.
And I'm glad we're following Larimer County. If we were following Weld County, our streets would be 3rd Avenue Street Court South. And 4th Avenue.
All the time. Yeah, we're sitting Greeley. It's on 4th and 13th. Okay.
Yeah, we'll report back on what we find out there.
Okay.
So procedure administration code, we've gone through some of the higher level concepts previously. This,
Versus the minor subdivision versus a major subdivision, what, can you,
sure.
I can go look at the definition, but you, I bet you know by heart.
Yeah, so the site plan process is for development of generally a building on the site. Commercial, industrial is, traditionally the board has wanted to prioritize those, so that's why they're called out separately from things such as multifamily.
Is it, make it need for, it's on the size of the building, site plan for a single building, is it any building, any size?
Yes, and then the minor subdivision currently is 6 or fewer than 6 lots. And I believe there's some other stipulations that it needs to be generally simultaneous with a commercial or industrial development, and can't be dedicating right-of-way or easements. And then the major subdivision is 6 or more lots. And then the preliminary major is, it's really just a 2-step process where preliminary is approved with a little less detailed engineering, and then that gets finalized on the final application.
So that's anything over 6 lots or having additional right of way?
Correct, yeah. And that's current code, and we're looking to tweak that some, but the general idea is the same, where there's a minor and major, and there's cutoffs for those.
Thanks.
Well, when you talk about appeals, you're talking about applicant appeals, right?
Applicant, it would also allow town manager and town board to appeal, should a situation ever arise where that's necessary.
How about citizens appealing
That is not included.
a planning commission decision?
That is not included. I know some communities do allow that, with, if you're within the mailing radius or some other stipulations, then you could appeal. It's not currently allowed in our code, and we hadn't proposed allowing it, but some jurisdictions do.
I mean, it looks like we're putting more on the planning commission, which is not an elected body, it's an appointed body. And if something goes south with their decision, the town board is probably the one that's gonna have to straighten it out eventually, whatever happens.
Mr. McCarter,
Yes.
just wanting to clarify, because what we're talking about is in this decision and appeal process, but obviously, is this the same, similar public hearing, quasi judicial? Certainly, any resident would have standing to challenge a decision that's made.
With regard to site plans, it's not zoning, and it's, you know, they have their entitled zoning in place. They're just, they need to show that they're meeting all of the standards for the site plan that the town board, or that the town has adopted, but there really wouldn't be any standing for a resident to,
Okay.
if they've got the zoning in place for that use, and they're meeting all the code requirements.
And that's true of all these, the
Right.
minor and majors.
The major subdivision is the only one on here that is actually a public hearing process currently.
So the conventional wisdom is that neighbors don't have standing to challenge a land use decision. It's the landowner or the town. What Paul was saying is that some of our neighbors have extended standing to those people,
Right.
but at this point, our code doesn't do that. I told Paul this afternoon that I want to look at that again, but the standard answer is no, neighbors don't have standing.
Okay.
Okay, I can understand where that could wind up a can of worms maybe, but, well, we back up a couple of years to the steeplechase apartments. Was that a rezone?
There was a rezone.
That was a rezone, that's why the town board was inundated with the neighbors
Mhm.
on that one.
And Ian maybe can elaborate, but I believe rezoning is, there's built in the code that provision for
Protests.
protest, yes.
So,
Okay, but town board still handles all the rezones.
yeah,
Correct.
quasi judicial town board action.
Then you're not suggesting that change?
No, annexations, rezones would all stay with town board.
And does the major sorry, Doctor.
Oh, that's okay.
Does the major subdivision track that same process in terms of, because I think you said,
It currently requires a public hearing, but I believe we're going away from that with this process. And I guess I just want to reiterate what I said at the last work session. This isn't necessarily, you know, it could look like staff was trying to make this a power play where we're trying to make everything administrative approval, and that's definitely not the case. We were given the directive to look at what our neighbors are doing and streamline our process. It was during the whole brands discussion, and Loveland had gone to almost all administrative approvals, and to have parity with our neighbors, we wanted to look at code amendments like this that would keep, you know, if somebody wanted to go on the Loveland side or the Windsor side of the brands, which process was gonna be less onerous, you know, that was the impetus for this discussion.
Tell the town board, turn this down, it's too close to my grandma's house. But when you're applying the code and you're applying the short technical document, the board doesn't necessarily even have that. You know, it's not even a place where we're saying, here's your discretion. I mean, really, we're presenting and we're saying, this applicant meets the code, here's the different areas of code that they've met. And the board's there checking the boxes, making sure staff has done our job. And really, the public is supposed to be there to make sure you're doing your job. But I think we set it up for kind of a false narrative, because we ask them to come and they get up and they say, I don't want this subdivision, and the board's like, I don't know if we have that. So that's, I think, a part of this discussion as well, is how many of these things are real technical documents that obviously we need to put some sunlight on, but how many hearings do we have when we set up kind of the board to say, sorry neighbors, you know, staff's recommending this and it meets the code. So is it just kind of a false look of democracy to them to be able to get up and say something when really the board is presented with something that says this meets our code?
yeah, I think the only time I remember having a conversation was around the height restriction. And in that case, what they were proposing was outside of the code, so they needed to come.
Which something like that still would come before the town board anyway, even under this or not?
So I believe height,
I thought I read something
I
about
believe
that.
height review is proposed to go to planning commission.
Oh,
As well as variances?
Variances, no, those would still go to Board of Adjustment. So height's actually separate from variances in our code.
Well, I'm sorry, so if the height restriction is 30 feet, somebody wants to build 35, that's a variance. No?
You would think so, but no, the code actually calls out height reviews as separate, not a variance. And they provide a shadow study, and those currently go to planning commission, I
Right.
believe. Yeah, so we're not proposing to change that.
Well, we sure heard something.
Yeah, so they saw the height to the new indoor tennis
Mhm.
facility, and it was, I thought it was a variance, it was,
5 feet or 10 feet higher.
It was a
Height review, height waiver.
waiver.
And the apartment, the steeplechase apartment example, that height came up in that one, and in that case, I believe it was a development agreement. It was a development agreement standard, it was not a code standard.
Yeah, the subdivision development agreement that was executed at that point incorporated some corridor plan requirements, which included height restrictions, so it was kind of a separate standard specific to that property.
So I'll go back to the tennis facility, so what happened there, where we did hear, or had to hear testimony regarding a waiver, that was a waiver, would that not happen under your revised procedures? Or would it?
The revised procedures before you tonight are, so that height waiver, I think, was decided by the planning commission, but there was a separate portion of that application that needed town board review. I don't remember what item that was.
I believe it was building materials or
Building
something like
materials.
that. There was a percentage of stucco or something like that that was also.
Or was it the parking? You didn't want to finish the parking?
That was power to play, I think, you know.
Okay.
But there's, so we have
I'm certain the board heard the height though, we talked about the
I
height.
think it
Mhm.
came up,
Yeah,
but
we
it
did.
wasn't.
And there was a materials clause too, I think it was the sheet metal.
But wasn't it like in that quarter, like we're too close to I-25 and so there was a restriction, maybe it was something that wasn't our height. I think there was another code, there was like
Yes,
another
that's-
corridor.
there was some corridor plan
Yeah.
that,
I think there's a corridor plan that governed the height. We had a question whether or not the I-25 thing governed or that governed.
I think you may be right, yeah.
Yeah,
And so I guess my point,
so then it would still go in that case, because we had another plan that governed that, so under this, we would have still seen that.
Same.
But most height modifications, if they don't have something else in play, apparently just go to planning commission.
Mayor, Ken has a question.
Okay, Ken?
Ken, go ahead.
I'm listening pretty carefully and trying to understand. I'm on page 32 in the packet where it talks about height review. And just check my understanding. As I read this, the decision maker in the proposal here would be the planning commission. But the A means that we, the town board, would be available for appeals. Am I reading that correctly?
You are, that's correct.
Okay.
And has all this been presented to the planning commission? And what was their response to this?
it wasn't presented separately, it was, they were, I believe some members were at the last work session when it was discussed.
But we didn't really get feedback.
Right.
Ian, I have a question for you. Now, statutorily, we have to have a board of adjustment, correct? And we have to have a planning commission. All our other boards are strictly been created by us. And statutorily, the board of adjustment is charged with what?
Two things. Appeals of the zoning decisions by the zoning officer and variances.
And variances.
Yeah.
Okay. But we have had them available for other appeals, is that correct?
We can assign them other duties, and we have. But we can't take away their statutory power to hear variances and appeals of zoning determinations by the zoning official.
Okay. Well, I guess if we turn these powers over to I guess you can call them, staff and the planning commission, and we're relying on you, you know, in the past, and not just here, but, you know, planning commission and town board have gotten at odds from time to time, you know, where they approve something and the town board said, hey, wait a minute. And then the town board had the opportunity to change it right then and there. But I guess we rely on staff to advance all the strategic plans and the wishes of the town board when you're reviewing that with the planning commission.
That's right, and I think it's also why the code is important to making sure you all are bought into what the code is requiring. And if the code is clear in what's required, then there shouldn't be a question of planning commission versus town board of what's approved or what's not.
Unless, where's the oversight for staff if,
What kind of Ian
What-
was just speaking to, yeah.
Well, but every staff decision though does have an appeal body though. So if, at any point, if the applicant, if they get denied and they don't like staff's denial, they can appeal. There's always an appeal body.
I guess my only concern is, if I'm reading this chart correct, is that the town board is basically not involved at all with appeals, except for on a major subdivision in the preliminary.
Yeah.
I guess I'm
But we're not,
I'm
yeah.
not speaking for the whole board or for boards to come, but I'm a little bit concerned about the town board not having the, I guess, final appeal ability.
I think the reason we're doing this, and forgive me if I'm stepping in too much tonight, is to keep you focused on stuff that has room for discretion. If there's a criteria-driven decision, and staff presents you what the criteria are, and the record is such that the criteria has been met, what happens though is at these hearings, we have folks show up who feel very passionately about it, but the topic of their testimony is irrelevant to the criteria. And then it puts the mayor or the chair in a position of saying, we don't need to hear this because it doesn't match the criteria. And so what you get is you sit through a lot of hearings with a lot of irrelevant evidence that you can't use when the criteria are clear in the code and getting clearer under this revision. So I think that's what's going on here, is we're trying to keep you from hearing a lot of irrelevant evidence and being put in a corner by that kind of pressure when it's a criteria-based decision.
And so major subdivisions is the only place where we don't have that? Because that's where we're at? That doesn't put us,
Basically,
that
yeah,
doesn't put us
so-
in that position?
It does, I mean, because people show up and say, I don't like what you're doing to the owls, right? That's not one of the criteria, but we hear a lot of that. And so in that case, what we're saying is, we're gonna limit your exposure to that to one of these categories instead of a bunch of them. And that's a decision for you to make. Do you wanna sit through these hearings and hear about owls when owls aren't part of the criteria?
Well, so there's two parts of this. So one is, I think the initial thing that Mr. Falstaff brought up is just, how do we streamline our process, right? How do we cut out some of these hearings? How do we get these questions, if they meet the criteria, quicker to an approval? So that's one part of this. The other part is, if staff is reviewing those and the really technical documents, if somebody doesn't like our answer, who do they go to? So it's really kind of two parts here. So again, this is all, I think with our current process right now, we've streamlined the site plan review. If the board feels like the rest of this is a little bit too radical and you're not ready to let it go, that's great. I mean, we can move on. If the board would rather keep the process the way it is, that's fine. I think that there are some places to improve it, but if you don't really have a comfort level with it, then, we don't have to change any of that.
Well, I guess my concern might come back to something that Dr. Jones said earlier, which is if the appeal is being heard by the Planning Commission, which is an appointed by the board roles that they have, and I think that this is what Dr. Jones was getting at earlier, which is the people would probably rather appeal to the town board, being they're the political officials versus appointed by the board. That am I correct, Dr. Jones? I think that's what you had brought up
Well,
earlier,
yeah.
and I can see
I mean,
why.
the buck stops with us eventually.
Right.
I mean, do we want a layer between us and the?
And it's no disrespect to the planning commission, but like you said, I think that's the role of the town board. I could be wrong and maybe people would disagree, but I feel like that's what the developers or applicants would desire, is that the town board hear their case maybe versus having the planning commission in between.
Mayor, Ken has a question.
Okay.
Or comment. Ken?
Yeah, I've been looking at page 32 and 33 pretty carefully on this. I'm looking,
Can I look at
like
yours
most
as
of them, I
well?
got concerned about the comp plan administration or amendment and the land use map amendment. Those seem like those are pretty big things that are due to the town board. Could you maybe give me an example of what something would be, one of those?
Well, the land use map amendment is statutorily the purview of the planning commission. So that's something that's based straight out of state statute.
What about the comp plan?
Yeah, the planning commission adopts the comprehensive plan and the land use map. And so those are both statutory, so those aren't proposed to change.
So they can make major changes to that without elected officials reviewing it or having a say?
Conceivably, they could. When we adopted the 2016 comprehensive plan, we actually took the unique step of having town board make a recommendation to planning commission, being the approving body, but that way the town board had the say in the process. So, we could probably do something similar to that with land use map amendments as well.
We could, yeah.
I guess I've gotten a little more comfortable, this has been a good discussion, and when I look at this compared to, and Ken, thanks for directing us to pages 32 and 33, because it's a little more expansive list of whose decision and whose appeal.
Yeah, it's easier to read that.
Yeah. So when I look at these areas and now better understanding the categories you're discussing here, I don't know, I think when I think about a single site plan and a single building, and even same with multifamily minor subdivision, and I think you have it right. I think especially as Ian was saying, these are things driven, you're not talking about zoning issues. They are within rights by right using this property in accordance with the zoning. And if they are, there's not much decision the board can stand to make. So I think when I look at 32, I'm getting comfortable that I'm liking this process. The only question I have, and I think Ken's probably right, the comp plan, I'm shocked in a way that the land use map is sort of the buck stops with the planning commission, but apparently by statute that happens. Is the minor subdivision major, preliminary versus final? And I guess your thinking is that the preliminary plat is really kind of where the action is in terms of discussion or variant changes, and the board would be a source of appeal for preliminary. But then when it shifts to final, we are not involved anymore. And that feels like it'd almost be the other way around, that the preliminary discussion would be.
Right, so the way you characterize it, yeah, with the the preliminary being
Where the action is.
There's more action, that's probably correct. The appeal body, I guess route we took was, it's always the next higher level. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but staff goes to planning commission decisions go to town. That's how it's laid out.
How often, what kinds of changes would occur between a preliminary approved plan and a final? Would it be extensive?
No, so we've actually added criteria to make sure there are not extensive changes where it is more the technical engineering side of, we added a percentage, you could add a certain number of lots, plus or minus 10% or something, but general street layout and lots should be consistent with preliminary.
If it's more than that, it falls back to almost being a preliminary again.
Right.
If the town didn't like what the planning commission came up with for a comp plan, they didn't like a particular zone in this particular spot, and can we appeal somewhere?
Fire them.
I mean, can we just
Yeah, that's a good idea.
do a rezone on our own if
Well,
we have that?
I mean,
And I guess that's where we need to clarify, it's the land use map, so it is conceptual land uses that, those are land uses that the town anticipates the property will be zoned that, but the ultimate approval of zoning still comes to town board. So the zoning map is supposed to be consistent with the land use map. The land use map is more of a vision document.
Okay.
And if someone comes in with a zoning that is inconsistent with the land use map, the town board still is the final authority to approve any rezoning or zoning with an annexation.
are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, no, surprising myself, I'm getting comfortable with all this, something's wrong.
Check
You're
its
lying.
temperature.
Yeah, I know. Better do the testing. It's a general,
That's scary, that's scary.
yeah. The general sort of chip.
So where are we headed with this? Generally, sounds like acceptance of this? Of
we had a couple points, I think you guys took notes on a few things that were raised.
That they'll add.
I again wouldn't mind at least getting some sort of confirmation from those you reached out to say, we're good with it, or we don't care, or, you know, something.
I would highly encourage, the planning commission to come to that April meeting, and maybe we really, and we, again, maybe really point some certain things, and this might be one of those things too, just so they're, and so that we can hear, maybe whoever is there, hears their feedback.
And I think that this is something that David brought up, or maybe he touched on, is, for instance, like, what it sounds like kind of happened in the last couple weeks or so is that Martin Lynn was bringing up certain questions about what we were getting ready to do, but yet Norris Design had been in the meetings or had been notified, and so maybe there was a communication breakdown between the two, because I know staff was probably going, wait, Norris was there, or they, you know, knew about this. Is there some way to get some kind of sign off, I guess, from Norris or Martin or somebody that they're on the same page, or that one speaks for the other or something like that, so there's not that, you know, like, that Norris is aware of what's happening, or that what's gonna be proposed, so that all of a sudden Martin's not mad and then the two of them are infighting and then somebody's caught in the middle, I guess, I don't know. And maybe they're just the example, but I guess
Well, I can speak, I've seen all of the emails and the attempts that Paul has made to Norris and Martin's team, and, I know that, I think, just the pace of development and things right now, maybe they didn't have time to delve into it as much as they'd like, but we did make numerous attempts to get, and a lot of and most of the comments did come from Norris, but one more attempt to explain and see if there's any last comments, we can certainly do that.
well, and obviously, we're not trying to get between the relationship between Martin and Norris or whatever, but I mean, if Norris is saying that they're up to speed on what's going on, and then there's a lack of communication or a breakdown between the two of them, that's different, you know, yeah.
Do these result, or do you ever invite them to an in-person kind of sit-down review, or is it almost always, at the end of the day, I much prefer to sit down, because the words, it takes a long time to type everything I just said, let
Right.
alone something complicated.
Right.
So, I feel like a sit-down in-person meeting accomplish a lot.
Yeah.
And then you have a hard time denying they didn't get their input, right?
Yeah, we certainly plan to follow up
Yeah.
as suggested, yeah.
Okay.
So, next slide. So back, I guess, to if we're comfortable with this concept, we can generally report on most of these land use applications to you, the exception being the major preliminary subdivision, which could potentially be appealed to you. We do have, the reports we put online, the community development report.
So those will just be like in the end of our packet, like we've gone to with the other, what's this,
Site plans.
site plans that we're
Yeah.
seeing now, just at the end.
Right, so it's just the publicly available information, a real quick overview of the project, just so you are aware of it. I think that's as much information as we would want to provide. And Ian also was suggested, I guess, lack of a better word, kind of disclaimers of if an applicant were to appeal, we would want them to acknowledge that the town board may have had some awareness or involvement with the project. And on the flip side, town board would kind of acknowledge that they received a report on it, just vision and what that cutoff criteria is essentially. And it's maybe a little bit too rigid right now, forcing things to the major subdivision. So we want to open that up a little bit. Timing on referrals to other agencies, looking to just increase that, I think, from about 2 weeks to 3 weeks, as sometimes those agencies have a hard time meeting that deadline. So just giving them a little more flexibility. Neighborhood meeting timing, we would be decreasing, it's currently a 30-day wait period from the neighborhood meeting to planning commission, decreasing that to 15 days. And then review criteria, the ordinance includes criteria for each land use application for how they should be reviewed. And that's in the ordinance. Updates on things we discussed, commercial industrial project prioritization. The direction from town board has historically been to prioritize those, and that was why it was essentially an administrative review always, while multifamily was not. Since that distinction would potentially be going away and they'd all be administrative, we did want to include code language that still prioritizes those projects, so when we're setting our review deadlines and things, commercial industrial would get the highest priority of staff time in reviews. And then last thing is the substantial change, which is essentially it requires, if an application is denied, there needs to be a substantial change for it to be resubmitted. And this is language that's adapted from Weld County, where a denied application would need to go before town board for a finding of substantial change, and then the application could be reviewed. So if there's a major shift in the layout of the design or the land use patterns surrounding it, things of that nature, that would require, those would be grounds for granting that substantial change.
And who determines what major is? Is that actually all defined? Or is it subjective up to who the planner is looking at that?
So it's defined and it's in and then it goes to town board for ruling on it.
Yeah, essentially, if an application's denied, an applicant can't just wait a month and see if they'll get a different answer with the same application. They have to actually show that circumstances have changed either around the property or they've made changes to the application. And that would be a board determination if it's a substantial change or not.
And that's everything.
Any final comments or questions? Are you seeing anybody on your end who's?
I have no hands up.
I have a question.
Okay.
On page 35 of 87, under referral process, paragraph 2, capital A, and then the Romanettes under that. Where do ditch companies fit in that?
They would, I believe, be a referral agency.
So do we have should we add a Romanette that includes ditch companies? Assuming there's a ditch through the property,
You said
Because
page
35 of 87 at the bottom. And
In the
then
packet. We have
Because
10 Roman numerals, he's talking about adding an 11th.
Yeah, we can add that.
Because we've had, in the last couple of years, 2 separate subdivisions that have ditches through them.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Ken, you're on?
Okay, I just had 2 questions, and I'm thinking of the answer. On page 37, we talked about scheduling and timelines for neighborhood meeting, public hearing. Are staff comfortable that you have the capacity to meet those timelines?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Yeah, so about scheduling, so he's on page 37, and is talking about
Yeah, I think
the neighborhood meeting,
I lost
public
the page
hearing.
here someplace, but I think we're trying to streamline the process, so I think there's less time between some of these meetings and viewed by staff. I'm just asking if staff is comfortable that you have the capacity to meet the timelines that we're suggesting.
We are, yes.
Okay, I thought so. I just want to make certain. Page 53, this is just a small thing, but it's interesting because it came up in a conversation with somebody last week. accessory dwellings. Could you just briefly tell me what those are, and is anybody actually using them?
Yeah, so they are kind of like what often called mother-in-law, granny flats, often kind of above a garage. Scott actually worked on the code amendment about 5 years ago to allow them. They're,
They have to be, what, 1,100 square feet or less?
I think it's maybe 900,
Or is it less
1,000,
than that?
somewhere in that.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're small in size and
Yeah, they're a second dwelling unit on the same property, and they're served by the same utilities. So, you know,
Okay.
it's been a popular movement in the planning world over the last decade, particularly as, you know, aging parents maybe live in the accessory dwelling unit on the property, or the code doesn't prohibit it from also being rented out, but one of the two dwelling units has to be occupied by the property owner. So, we have had, I don't know, maybe 10.
I've seen quite a few of them lately going up.
Well, and Ken, I can
Don't
tell
you
you
have
in
any-
Durango, there were instances where the people built an ADU, they moved into the ADU and rented out their primary single-family home as well, so it was,
It's a form of infill development that is taking advantage of the utilities and infrastructure, lend itself, going back to the cul-de-sacs discussion, the older part of town has a little bit more advantageous layout for having a cottage in the back that maybe has access off the alley or some things of that nature that we're not seeing them in the new.
Yeah, it would seem like you have to have a lot size to accommodate something, and put some height restrictions, all that stuff. Okay, I'm just curious.
Well, and your
I was really
HOA
looking
would,
at
I mean, a lot of these newer places, I don't know that their
HOA
HOA would allow it.
Right.
And it doesn't
Yeah,
have
I
to
don't
be, it
know
doesn't have to
that-
be connected to the primary residence though.
no, it could be over a garage.
So let me bring up a case to make sure I'm encapsulating this whole thing. So out like in Steeplechase, there's people that, because they have a larger space, that they go build like a livable unit above like a garage type thing out on their property. Is that an ADU? Is that, okay.
Miles has a question. Miles?
Yes, thank you. But as we wrap up, I just would like to reiterate my opposition to the oil and gas development within the residential zone.
Okay,
That's all I have.
anything else?
No, Mayor, so I think what we'll do is we have another discussion set in April. So we're gonna do some reach out to the development community. I think we can kind of bring this back, and so we'll just kind of bring everything back in once.
Yep.
Hopefully have one final work session where the board feels happy and we're hearing good positive things, and then we can bring it back for adoption after that.
April 4th, is that the date?
Let me look.
Gosh, let's
Sixth.
hope we are able to still convene by then.
Yeah, that's way in the future.
Yeah, time will tell.
Yeah,
2
April,
weeks
April
away.
6th.
April 6th, okay.
You know what, I guess I gotta reiterate again, this is amazing effort. I mean, it's just amazing. It's well thought out. The detail of that is, it took time. It took a lot of time, and kudos to you and your staff, Scott. I'm sure you had nothing to do with it.
No, Paul deserves, and the attorneys as well, deserve a ton of credit.
Thank you, Ms. McCarter.
Okay,
Nice project.
thank you. We'll look forward to hopefully wrapping it all up in April. So, okay?
Great.
Thanks.
So thanks. We'll excuse you guys, and then I think, because we're being televised, so I think what we'll do is we'll let Ian or you, Shane, bring us up to date, like some of the proclamations and some of the actual stuff we're working on.
Sure, so one thing is, this is statutorily kind of under my purview to issue a local emergency proclamation. I have one for you right here. And so, because Ian and I started talking about this on Friday and just thought, okay, we need to really kind of be ready to go. Let's pull up the one from the tornado. And we saw Larimer County and Fort Collins and Loveland all issued these kind of Friday and into the weekend on Saturday. For me, part of the hesitancy was, let me really understand the benefits of doing that. I think, my concern, and I've seen that a lot, is, I don't want our public to panic. Right now, we don't have any cases in Windsor. So I really don't want
And
to.
I just want you all to know that Shane and I have been in conversation pretty consistently, and I've supported him in that decision that we needed to kind of wait.
Right, so we wanted to be smart about it, but it's also on the other end of, really, to me, understanding the benefits of doing a local declaration. One is, we're not certain if any money would come in through FEMA or other state sources, but typically, you need that local declaration in order to really make yourself eligible for that. Secondly, I think it gets us in a position of kind of activating our emergency operations plan and kind of getting in that mindset of, okay, something may be coming here, so let's think a little bit more strategically. If that EOP's in place, we may, for example, say, we're gonna forego normal bidding procedures. We need these things, we need blankets or whatever we need. Instead of going out to three vendors trying to get bids, let's just go and just kind of cut our way around that red tape. So that's why you do a local declaration. I think in the end, it's not gonna hurt the community by doing that. I could see in the future it could benefit us, but it seems like a reasonable position to take. If I do this, the board has a week to ratify it, so basically, I would do this ordinance or this resolution, I would sign it probably tomorrow morning, and then next Monday, the board would have a resolution in front of it, and you would either ratify that, continue on that declaration, or you would say, geez, COVID-19 ended on Saturday, Shane, I don't know if you noticed that, and we're not gonna move forward. So that's,
I'm sorry, Shane, so by making this declaration, you're saying we do automatically waive procurement rules? Or
No, that would just basically, that would open up our emergency operations plan.
Right.
And as a part of that, if we found it was expedient to do that, or there was a reason to do that, we could do that. We wouldn't automatically waive it. But it would just be, again, it's hard to think of that scenario where it's like, well, my gosh, we don't have 3 weeks to wait for bids to come in. We need this now. So, it would be, this would be a rural convenience. So this would be more like life safety or just real.
I think, what I see this is a proactive stance that we're taking, so that we're prepared in the inevitability that we need to declare something, that it doesn't constrain Shane from being able to make, decisions that have to be made, quickly. But the second thing is, as he alluded to, in the event that there is money that's gonna make itself available, we wanna make sure, we won't get that money if we haven't made this declaration, and so we certainly wanna make sure that we have the ability to help in whatever way we can, by who's gonna be affected by this. And so I think mainly right now, tonight, this is a proactive measure. I don't think it changes necessarily or means we're doing something or not versus not doing something, but it's giving Shane the ability to, depending on how things go, to be able to make some decisions quickly.
Right, so that's a first, and so, again, it would be, an emergency ordinance, that is really more, identifying, emergency powers. And so that's something that, Ian and I have also been working on today, and we don't have, because we were still working on this thing, right up to this meeting. I would like to email a copy to the board, because this is something that, we're gonna be asking you to take up in an emergency ordinance next Monday.
Along with this then, approving this, ratifying it.
That's right.
Plus adopting.
That's right. So first we're declaring just kind of a local emergency, and we're just giving ourselves the ability again, with monies or putting our EOP in place. The other one, I think, is one that the board's gonna have a lot more to say about and a lot more to think about. Certainly Ian and I have twisted this up a lot today. And, it has provisions like, if we need to put in, some kind of curfew in place, if we think it's life safety, health, to put a curfew in place, we can do that. has other things. If we think that a business is in imminent danger, I think it would have been kind of the restaurant example up until now. If we thought that people shouldn't be in large assemblies and the state hadn't already acted, and the county hadn't already acted, we'd have the ability to say, geez, this assembly's too much, you can't do that. So it's quite frankly nice that large organizations in the town have already taken that stance, because we don't have to kind of make those decisions. But anyway, it has a lot of elements to it, and I do want to send that to the board, because it's a little bit uncomfortable for me to say, geez, here's all the things I could do. I'll tell you, there's a lot of things that I wouldn't actually want to do. A couple of things that are what I consider to be really taking rights. It'd be something that would need to be ratified by the board in 72 hours. So just basically saying, if we say, geez, this business is a danger and it's closed, within 72 hours, the board has to meet and say, no, we're gonna still pay you for the time that you would have been at work. Because we have.
So that decision has been made?
It has.
Okay.
Because we have other folks, for example, we've got so I don't want to overshare information. We have somebody who's an hourly employee who has a sick child, and this person is also exhibiting a couple symptoms, but is a part-time person. She doesn't have any sick leave, no ability to not work and get paid. We made the decision, no, if your child is sick, having these symptoms, you have some symptoms, please stay at home. I would much rather pay you than have you feel like you have to come in and work and infect the whole staff. So we have a few non-essential folks. We've just said, stay at home and we're gonna move forward. But for the most part, it's just like, if I highlight community development, we have some planners. We've said, stay at home, take a computer home, work from home. You can process plans and do this work, and you don't need to be in the office. Same thing with some engineers. We've said, we like your work product, but you don't need to be in town hall for that work product, so please work from home. So,
And today, I worked so hard at home, I busted the I key off of my keyboard. That's how
Whoa.
hard I was flying.
It's all about you.
They're reporting.
Well, you know what? There's no I in team.
There's no I in team, so it's gone.
Stand by, please.
okay. Oh, and I wonder, okay.
Can anybody hear me on this end?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, so that has all been implemented, Tom, and we're still trying to work through. I think that probably the most challenging department has been the police department, because there's really no way, I think at no time is it more critical to have an active police department, right? I mean, people need to see law and order, but so basically the entire department is essential, PD. I think with his commanders, he's kind of got them on a couple commanders working from home, chief and another commander will be in the PD, and then I think they may try to rotate in and out. Because another benefit here is if you have something that comes through, you don't want all your leadership in the building, right? So you want to have a couple people that are working from home and doing that, because if something does come through and people get sick, you need that other wave of people to be able to come in and still police. So it's nothing is really clean here, but we are working through kind of department by department and identifying who's essential, who needs to be here, who's essential but can work from home, and who's quite frankly just kind of non-essential right now. But my message is also, if we're saying you're non-essential and you're at home, be prepared that we can call you up and say, we need you in here in the next 10 minutes. If you're getting paid, I don't want to see pictures on Facebook with a sombrero and a margarita and, it's just like you're not on vacation. You may be at home and you may not actually have work assigned at that moment, but if you're kind of, if you're paid, you should be expecting to come to work at a moment's notice.
I'm curious, Shane, about trying, and maybe not now if you can't do it off the top of your head, I'm curious of where we are. What has Weld County issued? What has Larimer County issued in terms of meeting restrictions or whatever?
Sure.
What stores are closed or mandated to be closed, or which ones have announced that they're closing? I don't know, for instance, in Windsor, are we covered by a mandatory closure of retail or restaurants?
Restaurants, yeah. So we did go through the Weld County resolution earlier, and it was issued by their public health officer, public safety officer. He has said basically any event, including 10 or more people, prohibited.
Right.
And that covers a wide array, so things that are outright prohibited are rec centers, I think daycare centers, to the extent they have more than 10 people. I think, are movie theaters in there, or was that in the governor's proclamation?
Well, places of assembly, I would call movie theater a place of assembly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it extends to daycare centers, small group sports, assemblies, festivals, concerts, parades, civic, public, leisure, or sporting events, places of worship. So it's quite broad.
And that came late this afternoon, and then when the attorney and I were trying to figure out exactly how it applied in town, we found out that the governor had also issued a similar declaration.
So I have not been able to find that on the governor's website where the last executive order was
Like 3 days old, right?
Saturday,
Yep.
the ski area. So the one that you're talking about, he announced it, but it hasn't actually been posted yet.
And this is just for my own information. If he were to make some declarations, are we, by law, do we have to abide by those, or because we are home ruled, could we just determine that if we chose to follow or not follow, or do we have to? Same with Weld County, or do we have to abide by what the counties are dictating?
I would advise my client that you should abide by it because these, particularly if it's an executive order that's posted that says this is a matter of statewide concern, that's code for home rule don't trump me.
Okay.
So my advice to my client would be don't ignore it.
Or don't do something different than what
Yeah.
has been
Hold yourself to that standard.
Now, when you say we, are you talking about just various businesses within Windsor type of thing? or-
Well, no, I'm just talking about us as a home rule, because generally as home
Right.
rule, right, we can make our own determinations, but I don't know in a state of
Can I,
emergency all over the place where, you know, that follows, and so I just was getting
Can I get
clarification
into the
on that.
weeds
I'm
for
not
just a
saying we would.
can I get in the weeds just for just a second, building on what she just said? I'm just gonna pick on like the Hearth, for example. Let's say the Hearth decided we can't afford not to be open, you know, with our people or, you know, business model, et cetera. What are the repercussions if a business says, hey, irregardless of what the governor says, we're gonna stay open? What is the repercussions to a business? Or, I mean, we don't have like the
Yeah.
power to send our
Well-
PD down there and say, no, you're not letting anybody in type of thing? Or I mean, like, I know this sounds like we're at DEFCON 3, but
So the county's orders, I think, put a violation of $1,500 if you violated, right? And up to 6 months in prison.
So, yeah, so the county health department's declaration makes it a crime, includes a fine up to $5,000 and imprisonment in the county jail for up to 18 months. But that's a county measure, we have not done that. Under the ordinance that Shane's going to circulate to you, he does have the power to do that. And I suppose he could, under those powers, also provide for penalties and enforcement. So to answer your question, Shane hasn't done it, the county has done it, their penalties are set out in their.
and if a business chose to do it, and we have fines and stuff set in place, they could get fined by us, fined by the county.
I suppose so, yeah.
I mean, multiple agencies could all be, okay.
Well, yeah, and so I think, you know, because the question that the mayor asked before, does Weld County's order apply to the town? I think you could argue we're a home rule municipality, that doesn't apply here. And I think where it comes to your question is, if the Hearth determined they were gonna stay open, if the town didn't have that order, we probably wouldn't send police to enforce that county order. So it would just be a question on whether or not, you know, they're gonna send an SO to shut them down. When it comes to, like, the attorney said, I think to the governor's executive order, I think we would be hard pressed to go in the face of that.
Are they still allowing for drive-through and delivery though?
What
Yes.
I read about
As
the
far as,
governor's.
is that,
Yes.
is that
Yes.
still,
They are.
Okay.
But I wouldn't, you know,
Well, I think we would imagine that the restaurants in town are gonna be hit disproportionately hard by this.
Yeah.
I
can't even imagine.
I think general retail, 10 or more, I think that a lot of small businesses could probably work through that. But I think dining establishments, coffee shops, I would think that.
Well, and if you don't have your restaurants open, I mean, your little retail shops, there's not gonna be any need for them to be open because everybody's gonna assume everything's.
Well, like, for instance, this afternoon, my wife went into Starbucks to buy a bag of coffee, and they had all of the tables slid out of the way into the corner. All you could do is go up to the register, order something, and leave. There's no staying around at tables or anything, exactly. So it's either drive-through to go, or order it and leave. So it's,
So that goes back to what I mentioned when we first kind of got together about what, if anything, the town can do to kind of help support these small businesses. I think we all love the fact that they're here. I'd love them to be here a year from now. But boy, oh boy, if this lasts 3 weeks and somebody still has to pay their rent and they have to pay sick leave on employees, they're done. And I know that SBA program maybe is difficult, voluminous, and not timely. But do we have resources where perhaps, through the Chamber of Commerce or through the DDA, we can help the small business owner that may not know how to jump through all those hoops or is there a statewide bucket that is there to assist small businesses? Or should the town?
or is that where this federal money was supposed to trickle down? I mean, was that?
It's there.
Well, I think a lot of
It's
this
not gonna be tomorrow.
is in the unknown. I don't think anybody knows, but, and I'm gonna go out on a limb here, but I'm gonna say that these are folks, they are the backbone of our community. And I would expect that, as the mayor and the town board, I don't know what we will do.
In this crisis, we know we have this pot of money to incentivize jobs, but this
And
is,
to retain business too, though.
that's right.
I mean, that's-
So if the board would be willing to be more flexible with criteria.
That if it meant that we don't even wanna wait till next Monday or something, if there's a need to reassemble the troops that can make it, or even have another one of these kind of meetings. My point is a week is a long time right now for these businesses to, I mean, even if it was a next Monday discussion versus we could meet Wednesday night, or, you know what I'm saying, or something where it could even be done sooner than I'm just throwing it out there, I'm not trying to put staff in a box.
But again, I think again, we have to remain calm and we need to make sure we are going through the right processes because this stuff is changing like every 2 hours. And so we want to make sure that we're putting together a long-term plan that really can benefit the most folks at the most crucial time.
I'm not
So-
disagreeing, but I don't know how much
so-
worse it gets
so-
than the businesses basically not being able to do anything.
Well, I mean, all this is just happening, and I think that they're the starting point to kind of be looking at some things, and while I don't disagree that it's critical that we do something, again, I don't want to heighten and have everybody in this state of emergency that it has to be done within the next 24, 48 hours. I think it's more prudent that we really are diligent about what we're gonna do so that we can figure out how we're gonna help them the best way we can in a long-term plan. Because that's the thing we don't know, is how long this is gonna go.
And Christie, I'm not trying to argue your point or contradict what you're saying. I'm just saying I'm willing to meet earlier the next Monday if there was something that needed to come back for a board discussion.
Sure, well,
That's all I mean.
and that's fair, so I think what we could do is, like I said, this conversation, really, when we saw Will County order followed right by the governor, I was talking to economic development right away, like, okay, now what? And so, if we do have something, she has some thoughts between economic development and upstate and some other folks we can bring in the chamber. If there's any concepts or anything that we could bring to the board sooner than next Monday, that's fair. I mean, I think you're right that it's, if we had something concrete on Wednesday, let's talk Wednesday. But short of that, I think I could take a look at the work session on Monday and clear the deck there and just kind of keep this as kind of top of mind in front of the board as far as your best action item.
Well, let's encourage the residents to get out there and buy
I think
these
so, too.
certificates.
Yeah.
Do a next door, do a Facebook, do whatever, and say, hey, these people could be hurting, and you're gonna go to the Hearth when this is all over, go get a $100 gift card, and, help keep them afloat that way, because, even with the whatever we have left in economic development, I don't know what it is, but, I mean, you spread that around to 100 businesses, it's not gonna amount to a whole lot.
Right, yeah, it wouldn't get them all away for a month, for sure.
But I mean, if, you know, Windsor people have stepped up pretty good, you know, donating to this and that, and
Mhm.
maybe they,
One part of the announcement is a new campaign the governor has announced called #DoingMyPart. And it encourages people to be neighborly. And so I'll look into that with comms and see how we can maybe promote that too. And that might be
Yeah.
helpful.
And I think, and Shane, I guess one of the points I was trying to make is that Stacy and Jill are racing around. And if we are gonna try to help and assist small businesses through some loan process, I'm fine with you redirecting staff to support them. Because this stuff will all get pretty convoluted and process oriented, and the small business owner probably has no idea how to fill out Form 2735-12.
Mhm.
So any help that we can provide them in that regard. I love the idea, Dr. Jones, of publicizing a,
Yeah.
Windsor Strong thing that's.
Yeah, who knows, there may be even some small business, something that will come down the loop, with, with all the SPVAs or something. I mean, they might all be redirected. I would assume, they're already under the governor's.
I think like the rest of COVID-19, I think everything that we know today, a week from now, is gonna be totally different.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel markedly different about everything in just 1 week's time.
Yeah. Me too.
different which way,
Me too.
better, worse, next week.
Well, a week ago today, I thought we were gonna have a real focused discussion on the land use code changes and subdivisions, and it's like, we barely even got to it, you know?
So I think the most important message is that we are being proactive, we are staying on top of this, we